Hello and welcome to Louise Singleton Creations. In some of my previous videos you may have seen me casting dried flowers in resin. This is a really popular thing to do, especially if the flowers hold some significance and you want to preserve them. However, sometimes you might just want to make something beautiful without going to all the trouble of drying flowers or buying dried flowers. That's where today's video comes in. In today's video, I will be casting artificial fabric flowers in epoxy resin to create a beautiful nightlight. And I will also be revisiting my idea of casting resin in a plastic bottle. So if all of that sounds interesting, stay tuned and enjoy the video. This is the bottle I'm going to be using today because I've discovered that this kind of bottle works really well. There aren't any seams in it when you take the label off. It's nice and smooth and you can see that you're going to get a nice smooth finish. It's also a really good quality plastic. It's not too flimsy at all. So after taking the label off, I needed to cut off the top of the bottle and the bottom too. You could just use a craft knife for this, but I prefer to start the hole off with a craft knife and then continue with scissors. I just find that you get better control that way. So I'm starting with the top and I'm leaving about 1/2 inch extra that I don't actually need at the top, and that will make it easier for me when it comes to demoulding. It also gives it some extra strength and stability if I leave part of that shape. You see how it goes narrower towards the top? Well, as it starts to go narrower, if you leave some of that on, it will help to keep the shape of the bottle, and so that's my logic as well. I might be wrong, but I think that will help it keep round. So with the bottom cut, I need to be more accurate. That needs to be nice and smooth and straight. There is a line there that you might be able to see, and I'm trying to follow that line. Once I'd finished cutting off the bottom of the bottle, I went around with my scissors to make sure I hadn't made any of it uneven, and if I had, I just needed to even it up and get rid of any excess little bits that might be sticking out. I want this to be able to stand flat on the surface. Once the top and the bottom were off, it was time to dry it because obviously I'd rinsed it out after I emptied the milk and it was still a little bit wet. So I gave it a good rub with the microfiber cloth to make sure that there were no droplet marks on the plastic. It was nice and smooth and shiny. Next, I placed my plastic on a silicone mat on my levelling table and I took some Let's Resin UV resin and tried to draw a circle of resin about the same size as the bottle. Don't worry if it's not a perfect circle, that really doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if the UV resin comes outside of the barrier either. That will all come off easily later on. So yeah, I've just put it into position and I'm trying to just make sure there that it went all the way around and I hadn't left any gaps. I noticed a couple of air bubbles, so I got my heat gun just to pop the bubbles and then put the barrier back and put my UV light from Let's Resin over the top. Okay, let me show you the flowers that I recently bought. These were all from a shop we have here called Dunelm, and they had all sorts of different fabric flowers there. And when I saw them, I thought, oh, I'm going to have to try this. I just knew I had to try them in resin. There's some absolutely gorgeous ones, which you will hopefully see in future projects. But for today, I'm using the tall little flowers, the pink ones and the white ones, and some of the green foliage, which is supposed to look like eucalyptus, I believe. So yeah, those are the ones I'm trying today. I say the fabric because I haven't actually read the label. I should have done. They're not silk. They're not expensive enough to be silk flowers. They're some kind of fabric. I don't really know what they are. But yeah, anyway, I wanted to see how they behaved in epoxy resin. My first job was to cut lots of sections of flowers to go inside the mould. And first of all, I took a coffee stirring stick, held it against my mould, marked it so I knew exactly the height of my finished piece. I didn't want any of my flowers sticking up out of the top of the resin. You really don't want that to happen. So be very careful when you're preparing your flowers. So once all my flowers were ready, I did try putting them all inside the barrier, but I found that it was too difficult to arrange them and to make sure that they were all touching the base. It was just too fiddly, too awkward, and I could see straight away that it wasn't going to work. So I came up with this next idea. So what you can see me doing here is adding a drop of UV resin onto my silicone mat, holding the foliage in place and then curing it with my UV lamp. It looks fiddly, it's not as bad as it looks, I promise. Let me show you it from a different angle so you can see more detail. So here I'm just adding the drop of UV resin. I did end up changing to a different brand shortly after this because I was running out of my Let's Resin UV resin, but it works really well. And yeah, anyway, there's the droplet. I'm just placing the flower in the droplet and then using my UV lamp. And what you can do once you've got them in place, if you want to make them a bit sturdier, just put some more UV resin on. And what I did actually do was I started to add more resin to join all the dots together so that when it was finished, it would all be in one piece. So as if by magic, here it is, all finished, all the flowers stuck together, all in one piece, and it was so much easier to arrange them in that way, and so I'm glad I came up with that idea. So before adding the flowers to the barrier, I wanted to use some more UV resin in there. The reason I put the UV resin in there, well, there was two reasons. The first reason was to make sure that the barrier wasn't going to leak. I needed to make sure that when I put my epoxy resin in there, it's going to stay in there. So I put in a layer about 1 millimeter deep. The other purpose for it is so that when I put the flowers in there, I can cure the UV resin and the flowers will be stuck. They're not going to float to the top when I put my epoxy resin in. And here you can see me tipping my levelling table in all directions to make sure that puddle of UV resin goes all the way around the edges, leaving no gaps. Then all I needed to do was pop my flowers in, give them a little bit of a press down to make sure that there's no air pockets in there and any air pockets can be squashed out. And then all I needed to do was cure it with my UV lamp. Job done. That's the hardest part all over and done with because the epoxy resin is the easy part. Okay, so the resin I'm using today is Let's Resin's Deep Pour Resin, and it's a 2-to-1 mixing ratio by volume. The recommended pouring depth with this resin is 2 to 4 inches. You should always try to keep within the recommended depth guidelines for any resin. They're all different and you need to check what the, guidelines are. Because if you go too deep, you could get a flash cure when it gets too hot. My mould is a little bit taller than 4 inches, but I did get away with it because my room was very cold and that did help. When your room is cold, it does slow down the curing process, but as long as you're patient, that's fine. It gives it longer for the bubbles to release by themselves. Once I'd measured out part A and part B, I used my handheld mixer from Let's Resin to give it a good mix. I'm using the big paddle because I'm using my big jug. I think I mixed it for about 2 minutes. I love this handheld mixer. It's got a stand as well, so you can do it hands-free if you want. But when you're using a big jug like this, I prefer to hold the mixer and move it around to make sure I'm getting all of the resin mixed. Once it's mixed, I could have used my debubbling machine from Let's Resin as well, but when you're using deep pour resin, I find you don't really need to degas it. It does it all by itself because it takes so long to cure. This took 2 days to cure, so I didn't degas it. It sorted itself out quite nicely. So yeah, it's just a case of pouring it in now and it's done. I just needed to wait. And because this was going to be standing around for 2 days, I covered it up. And here you can see I've got my cover from the Let's Resin bubble remover machine, which worked perfectly. Right, so believe it or not, although I'm still wearing the same cardigan there, it's 2 days later. And there you can see the excess UV resin that came out of the bottom in that first part of the process just comes off really easily. There was one last little bit I used my scissors for, but other than that it just snaps off. Now for removing the plastic bottle. The first time I tried this in one of my previous videos, it worked absolutely perfectly, so I was confident that it would work well again. However, this time I did have a little bit of a problem. I don't know if you can see there that the bottle is splitting a little bit as though it's got 2 layers. So yeah, it was fine until I got near the bottom. You just snip it and tear it, and most of it comes off absolutely beautifully, but in one place near the bottom there you can see there was a bit left. It was starting to split, and yeah, I didn't want to be left with just that bit around the bottom because it was going to be hard to get off. So I had to be careful about the way I was peeling it off to make sure it all came off in one piece. Yeah, and there's the bit that caused me problems. It split. I don't know why. The first time I tried this, it worked perfectly. There we go. It came off, but it did leave a little bit of a mark. It was just in that one area. So I needed to polish that mark out. It hadn't marked the resin. It had just left a little bit of plastic on there. And once I polished it out with some epoxy polish, it was fine. So in case you didn't see my previous video, you might not know or realise, but I didn't use any kind of release agent inside the plastic bottle. I just used it as it was. And normally it is fine. It did just go a little bit wrong today, but it still came off pretty easy, didn't it? I think a way around it might be to score it with a knife, being careful not to go all the way through before starting to peel it off, and then I think I would get a much more clean peel. Yeah, next time I try it, I will try scoring it with a knife. But otherwise, it worked perfectly. The surface is so shiny from using that plastic bottle. And yeah, it solved me a problem because I've been wanting a silicone mould this shape for a long time, and I still haven't found one this shape and size. So that's why I ended up coming up with the plastic bottle idea. So next it was time to tidy up the top, and that was nice and easy. All I did was I rubbed it on some sandpaper. Don't try using a nail file and just doing a little bit at a time. It needs to go down flat onto the sandpaper to make sure it stays completely level. And then you can fill it with a thin layer of resin. I used the fast cure resin from Let's Resin. After I'd finished sanding the edges, it was nice and tidy. It still had a bit of a ridge around the outside, which is good. It's good to have that little bit of a ridge because that means when you put your top coat on, it stays contained. And so here I am pouring on my fast cure resin. It didn't take too much. You can see it's quite bubbly. It's a much thicker resin, the fast cure one. And out of all of the resins from Let's Resin, it's the one that's most likely to have bubbles in it because it's so thick. I wouldn't recommend this for pouring any deeper than what I'm pouring, but for something thin like this it's fine. The bubbles come to the top and you can pop them, but yeah, don't do anything too thick with fast cure resin. So after I'd finished pouring this and degassing it with my torch, I left it for about 5 hours and then it was ready. And so here it is on my turntable, which has a light on, so you get to see how it looks lit up. It will actually be living on a light base, which is also from Let's Resin, and if I can find my link to it, I will put it in the video description. But for now, let me just show you it on the turntable, so you can see it all the way around in the light and in the dark. So overall, I think the artificial flowers were a big success. Of course, you can probably see when you're looking close up that they're not real. Even you can probably see without looking close up. But I still think they look gorgeous, don't you? They're just beautiful. And the colours aren't going to fade, and I don't have to worry about whether they're dried enough and whether they'll start to go brown in the resin. They will probably stay like that as long as they're not in a window. I suppose daylight can even make artificial flowers start to lose the colour over time. But yeah, I wouldn't recommend keeping resin in a window anyway because it will yellow over time. But yeah, I think the artificial flowers look absolutely gorgeous, and I will definitely be using them again because I've got lots more to use and I love them. And we all like to make life easy, don't we? And these definitely do make life a lot easier. So here it is on the Let's Resin light base, and I think it looks fantastic. What do you think? Please let me know in the comments. If you've enjoyed the video, please do give me a thumbs up. It helps me massively, and subscribe if you would like to. And that's it for today. I will see you again next time. Thank you for watching, and bye for now.